A millionaire abandons his wife in the desert, and she is rescued by an Arab sheikh. The plane landed smoothly on the illuminated runway of Riyadh, and Angela looked out the small window, admiring the exotic landscape that unfolded before her. The city lights twinkled like stars in the darkness, and her heart beat faster with the excitement of being in such a distant and fascinating place. "We're finally here!" she exclaimed with a wide smile, trying to share her excitement with Brandon, who was at her side. Brandon, however, had his head down, focused on his cell phone. "Yes, we're here," he replied, without looking up from the screen. His tone was mechanical, distant, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. Angela sighed, trying not to let herself get down. She knew Brandon was involved in a big deal, something he had been planning for months. Still, she couldn't hide her disappointment. She had dreamed of this moment, imagining the two of them exploring the city together, discovering its wonders side by side. When they left the airport, a black car was waiting for them. The driver opened the door for Angela, who climbed in and settled into the soft leather seat. Brandon followed close behind, immediately turning his attention to his cell phone. She looked out the window, taking in the mix of tradition and modernity that made Riyadh so unique. Palm trees lined the wide avenues, while futuristic skyscrapers rose against the night sky. "Brandon, look at that," she said, pointing to a beautifully lit mosque passing by them. "It's all so different and beautiful, isn't it?" Brandon mumbled something under his breath, still absorbed in his emails and messages. Angela felt a pang of frustration, but decided not to press the issue. She knew this trip was important to him, but she couldn't help but feel left out. Arriving at the hotel, a luxurious retreat in the heart of the city, they were greeted warmly. Brandon briefly greeted the manager and went straight up to his room, not paying much attention to his surroundings. Angela, on the other hand, watched everything with curious eyes, trying to absorb every detail. In the room, Brandon dropped his suitcase in the corner and sat at the table, immediately opening his laptop. "I have a meeting in half an hour. I need to get ready," he said, without looking at Angela. She nodded, trying to hide her hurt. "Sure, I understand." Brandon was so focused on his work that he barely noticed when Angela stepped out onto the balcony, looking at the illuminated city. She felt the warm wind caress her face and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to find peace in the midst of her frustration. "Riyadh is truly amazing," she murmured to herself. "I just wish he could see it with me." In that moment, she decided that even if Brandon was busy, she would not let that ruin her experience. With or without him, she would discover the wonders of that enchanting city. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains of the hotel room, filling the space with a soft glow. Angela woke up with a hopeful smile, excited to explore the city. She put on light, comfortable clothes, eager to start the day with Brandon. "Shall we take a walk around the city?" she suggested, seeing him sitting at the table, already immersed in his laptop. Brandon glanced up briefly. "I have a few calls to make, maybe later," he replied, returning his attention to the glowing screen. Angela tried not to show her disappointment. "Okay, I'll just take a walk by myself then," she said, trying to keep her voice light. She stepped out of the hotel and was immediately taken by the beauty of the local architecture. The streets of Riyadh were a fascinating mix of tradition and modernity. The traditional buildings, with their intricate lattice windows and carved facades, contrasted with the glass and metal skyscrapers that rose in the background. The air was filled with the scent of spices and flowers, a constant reminder that she was in a place very different from home. Angela walked slowly, taking in every detail. She stopped in front of a mosque, its minarets stretching gracefully into the sky. The intricate design, the colorful mosaics, everything seemed to tell an ancient story full of meaning and tradition. "This is amazing," she whispered to herself, taking out her phone to take a few photos. She wished Brandon was there to share that moment with her. Back at the hotel, Brandon was sitting in the lobby, still glued to his phone. Angela approached him, hoping to capture his attention with the photos she had taken. "Look at these pictures, Brandon. The architecture here is so beautiful, so full of history," she said, showing him her phone. Brandon glanced at the pictures quickly and smiled vaguely. "Very beautiful, honey," he said without real emotion, before returning to his own phone. Angela's frustration grew by the minute. She felt like a mere companion, a shadow next to Brandon, who seemed incapable of disconnecting from work for even a moment. "Can't you just disconnect for a second to enjoy this with me?" she asked, a hint of sadness in her voice. Brandon sighed, looking up. "Angela, you know how important this meeting is. I need to focus, then we'll have time to explore together." Later, she repeated, shaking her head. "Always later. And in the meantime, I sit here, ignored, as if I didn't matter." Brandon remained silent, unable to respond. And Angela, once again, felt lost, suffocated by the coldness and distance between them. In the luxury hotel, the environment was sophisticated and elegant, but to Angela, the splendor around her seemed cold and distant. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she watched Brandon, who was hurriedly getting ready for yet another meeting. The impeccable suit, the expensive watch, and the cell phone always at hand were the symbols of his world, a world that, at that moment, seemed to have no room for her. "Brandon, could you please take some time for me today?" Angela asked, her voice full of hope. Brandon, his eyes fixed on the mirror as he adjusted his tie, answered without looking at her. "I would love to, Angela, but this meeting is crucial. I promise we will have time later." Angela sighed in frustration. "It's always later, Brandon. I'm here, in this amazing city, but I feel alone. This isn't what I expected when we decided to come here." "Angela, please understand," Brandon said, still busy with his preparations. "This is important to us. Everything I'm doing is for both of us." She stood up, approaching him. "For us? I don't see it that way. It feels like I'm just here to accompany you, without you really noticing me." Brandon finally looked at her, but his eyes showed impatience. "You're overreacting. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just too busy right now." "No, Brandon, you're ignoring me," Angela insisted, her voice getting firmer. "You're so focused on business that you've forgotten about me, about our relationship. I feel like an accessory, something you carry around without realizing it." Brandon, already holding the briefcase in his hand, looked at his watch. "We'll talk about this later, Angela. Right now, I really need to go." He walked to the door without waiting for an answer, leaving Angela alone. She watched him leave, feeling a wave of sadness and frustration. To her, Brandon's words were empty, and his promises of later sounded increasingly distant and unattainable. Angela stood in her room, the feeling of being invisible weighing on her shoulders. She knew something needed to change, but she didn't yet know exactly what or how. The only clear feeling was that she was increasingly disconnected from the man she loved. The next morning, the sun was already high in the sky when Angela went down to breakfast in the hotel restaurant. The tables were elegantly set. The buffet offered a variety of delicious dishes, but none of it seemed to bring her the comfort she was looking for. Sitting at the table, she waited for Brandon to join her for, perhaps, a moment of connection. Brandon arrived shortly after, dressed in his usual impeccable suit, with his cell phone in hand, already immersed in messages and emails. Without looking up, he sat down across from Angela, grabbed a cup of coffee, and remained focused on the screen. "Good morning, Brandon," Angela said, trying to start a conversation. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, I did," he replied absently, not looking up from his phone. "I need to answer these emails before the meeting." Angela took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I understand that you're busy, but can we have a moment to ourselves? Just the two of us?" Brandon frowned, still not looking at her. Angela, this is an important time. There's a lot going on, and I can't afford to stop now. Brandon, she began, her voice mixing sadness and frustration. We're on this journey together, but it feels like you're in a completely different world than I am. I feel like I'm losing you. Finally, he looked up, surprised by her tone. Losing? Angela, I'm working hard for our future. Why don't you understand that? I understand the work, Brandon, but what I don't understand is how you can be so present for your commitments and so absent for me, she replied, her voice shaking. I want more than empty promises of later. I want you here now. Brandon sighed, sounding impatient. I'm doing this for us. We can't have a good life without me dedicating myself to the work. But at what cost, Brandon? She asked, her eyes fixed on his, searching for an answer that didn't come. If you keep this up, we might have everything but each other. The silence between them became palpable, and Brandon glanced at his watch, clearly uneasy. I really need to go now, Angela. Can we talk about this later? Later, she echoed, shaking her head. Always later. What if there is no later, Brandon? What if all we have is this one now that you keep wasting? Without another word, he stood up and hurriedly left, leaving Angela alone once more, the hollow feeling deepening in her chest. Back in her hotel room, Angela felt consumed by a mixture of sadness and emotional exhaustion. She stared out the window, watching the vibrant city of Riyadh below, but all she could feel was a growing emptiness. When Brandon walked into the room, still adjusting his cuffs, she knew she had to speak. Brandon, can we talk for a moment? She asked, her voice soft but firm. He paused for a moment, looked at her, and sighed. Angela, if you hurry, I have an important meeting in a few minutes. She stepped closer, crossing her arms in front of her body in an attempt to shield herself from the pain she knew would surface. Brandon, I can't go on like this anymore. I feel like I'm just an accessory in your life, something you drag around without really realizing it. He frowned, a mix of surprise and irritation crossing his face. An accessory? Angela, that's not true. Everything I do is for us, for you, for our life together. For us? She repeated, her voice rising slightly. You say it's for us, but I don't see it. I don't feel it. What I feel is that you're always far away, even when you're here by my side. I feel like I'm fighting alone to hold on to something that you don't seem to value anymore. Brandon took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. Angela, I'm trying to build something for our future. I need to dedicate myself to work to make sure we have stability, comfort. Stability? Comfort? She interrupted him, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. Brandon, I want more than a comfortable life. I want a partner, someone who will truly be with me, who will share moments and not just plans. He glanced at his watch, clearly impatient. I understand that you're frustrated, but now is not the time for this conversation. I really need to go. You always need to go, she said, almost whispering. And I always stay, waiting for a moment that may never come. Without another word, Brandon picked up his briefcase and headed for the door. We'll talk when I get back, Angela. I promise. And with that, he left, leaving her alone in the silence of the room, with the feeling of abandonment settling deep inside her. She sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of his words still hanging in the air, wondering how much longer she could bear to be just a shadow in Brandon's life. Feeling overwhelmed by loneliness and the weight of the words left unsaid, Angela decided to do something different. The next morning, she joined a group of tourists on a camel ride through the vast desert surrounding Riyadh. She needed a break, a moment away from it all, to clear her mind and perhaps find a new perspective. The sun shone brightly as the group set off on their camels, moving in a serpentine line across the golden dunes. Angela felt momentarily relieved, allowing the majestic vastness of the desert to wash over her. Each step of the camel seemed to mark a slow, meditative beat that connected her to the land and the present. As the group paused to admire the landscape, Angela, drawn to a higher dune, decided to wander off a little. "I won't go far," she thought, convinced that she could return in a few minutes. However, as she climbed up and down the dunes, the landscape began to look less familiar. When she finally turned to go back, she realized that the group had disappeared from view. The desert, with its imposing beauty, suddenly seemed threatening. The vastness that had once comforted her now seemed overwhelming, and the heat of the sun weighed heavily on her shoulders. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she called, her voice echoing faintly in the empty space. No answer, only the soft sound of the wind blowing, shifting the sand. Panic began to set in. Angela turned in every direction, trying to find any sign of the group or the camels, but everything seemed the same, endless ripples of golden sand. She began walking, trying to remain calm, but with each step, fear grew. "How could I have been so careless?" she scolded herself. The thought of being alone in a vast desert was terrifying. Her water bottle was running low, and the heat was relentless. Feeling her heart race, she stopped and took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "I need to think. I need to focus. I won't panic." But the reality of being lost in the middle of the desert, with no guidance or help in sight, was undeniably terrifying. Angela realized that her adventure, which had started as an escape from the world, had now turned into a fight to find her way back, and possibly to survive. The sun seemed relentless, a giant beacon of fire in the sky, and Angela could no longer distinguish between the heat burning her skin and the fear consuming her insides. Her breathing was ragged, and each step seemed harder than the last. The fine desert sand moved with the wind, dragging under her feet and making the walk even more disorienting. She looked at her water bottle, almost empty. A feeling of panic took hold of her as she realized that the amount of water she still had was insufficient for the hours of scorching heat that she would face until she was rescued, if that ever happened. The thought that she might not be rescued made her shiver, but she tried to push the fear away. "I can't think about that right now," she whispered to herself, trying to keep her voice steady. With an effort, she forced herself to walk faster, her feet sinking into the hot sand. Her head felt dizzy and her vision was starting to blur. Her chest felt tight, as if the desert was swallowing her every thought, leaving her with the feeling that she was disappearing along with it. "I need to find help," she thought, as her thoughts mixed with the harsh reality of her surroundings. Her throat was dry, the feeling of thirst growing more intense by the second, and her mind was starting to get confused. She stopped, sitting down instinctively, the sand burning her legs, but she didn't care anymore. Everything seemed too far away, and she just wanted the feeling of despair to stop. The desert seemed endless. The sand stretched out like an immense golden blanket, without any sign of life or help. Angela closed her eyes for a moment, trying to regain her composure, but images danced in her mind. Brandon, so distant and immersed in his own world, the emptiness of her own life, and now this endless desert, which seemed to be a perfect reflection of her personal journey. Anxiety washed over her like a rising wave. Her breathing quickened and she trembled, not only from the heat, but from the overwhelming loneliness. What am I doing here? How did I get to this point? Thoughts about her life with Brandon, her search for something she could no longer find, began to surface. She felt tiny in the face of the vastness of the desert, like a simple drop lost in an ocean of sand. She tried to stand up again, but her legs were weak, shaking under the weight of exhaustion. The thirst, the heat, and the fear were beginning to become unbearable, and she sat down again, without the strength to continue. The desert now seemed like an immense enemy, and her small presence there almost insignificant. With a last breath, Angela looked at the horizon, wishing that something, would find her. She knew she could not continue alone, and with that, she fell onto the hot sand, feeling her eyes close, her exhausted body surrendering to the desert. Angela did not know how long she had been there, lost and without strength. Each breath seemed more difficult than the last. The scorching heat burned her skin, and even when she tried to move, her muscles wouldn't respond. Her body was exhausted, and her mind was beginning to lose itself in the fog of despair. She looked at the camel that was still in front of her, her faithful companion on the journey, with its peaceful and serene expression. The animal was equally tired, but seemed to have more energy than she did. Angela, with difficulty, raised her hand to her head, trying to support herself on the camel's carcass. The heat was so great that she could barely concentrate on her thoughts. It was as if the desert had taken over her mind, erasing any trace of hope. "Just a little longer," she murmured to herself, but her voice sounded strange and weak. She sought comfort in what seemed to be the only presence amidst the vast expanse of sand. The camel. Her breathing became more ragged with each attempt to stand up, and the feeling of fainting enveloped her completely. Her thirst became unbearable, and her throat was so dry that she could barely swallow. Her eyes grew heavy, and, before she could stop it, she felt her body give way, her legs giving out completely. She tried to support her hands in the hot sand, but she didn't have the strength to continue. Her thoughts became tangled, and for a moment she felt like she was giving in completely. She fell back onto the sand, her vision beginning to blur. The desert seemed to swallow her last vestiges of consciousness. Her eyes slowly closed, as the world around her became a hot blur. I can't die here," she thought. But the sadness of her situation was overwhelming. There was an immense weight on her shoulders, and she felt that she no longer had the strength to fight. The image of Brandon appeared in her mind, but it was so distant, like a memory erased by a veil of sadness. She wondered, almost without wanting to, if he would have cared, if she had gotten lost like this while he was so absorbed in his work. But in that moment, as the sand settled around her, that doubt seemed irrelevant. All that was left now was the vastness of the desert and her exhausted body. The camel, with its calm gaze, was still beside her, and Angela felt that it, somehow, understood her. It was as if the animal was saying, "I am here," but words could not comfort her at that moment. The desert enveloped her, making her smaller and smaller, and the feeling of abandonment became more and more intense. Despair finally began to give way to profound exhaustion, and Angela surrendered to the darkness that surrounded her, feeling that hope was fading like a distant mirage. She had lost everything, even the strength to fight for her own life. At that moment, the desert seemed to be the end of her journey, and perhaps the end of her story. The scorching heat of the desert enveloped her like a heavy, unbearable blanket, and the darkness that invaded her mind seemed endless. Angela was lost in a state between consciousness and unconsciousness, her senses slowly dissipating. Despair had consumed her, and she did not know if she was alive or if she had already departed to a distant place where suffering no longer existed. That was when a distant sound reached her ears, a soft but unmistakable beat. The sound of a horse's hooves, rhythmic and firm, cutting through the silent vastness of the desert. Angela, in her powerless state, could not react, but the horse seemed to be heading straight for her, as if it sensed her presence. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her. A man. The last thing Angela saw before her body gave out completely was the imposing figure of a man on horseback, dressed in light but sturdy-looking desert clothing. He stared at her for a moment, assessing the situation, and then quickly dismounted. "She's alive," he murmured almost to himself as he crouched down beside Angela. The man, with surprising dexterity, lifted her carefully, holding her body gently. The hot, relentless sand could no longer hurt her, and he led her away, leading her towards what seemed to be a tent in the distance. When Angela woke up, she felt a soft but comforting warmth. She was no longer in the desert, where the relentless heat seemed to want to devour her. She opened her eyes slowly and found a cooler, calmer environment. The air was soft, and the smell of herbal tea invaded her nostrils. She was lying on a simple but cozy bed, with light fabrics covering her body. Beside her was a man with a calm but worried look. He watched her carefully, as if trying to understand what had brought her there. His eyes were deep, dark, and his face, partially covered by a well-groomed beard, exuded a unique serenity. "You're okay now," he said softly, his voice low and calm. "I'm Karim, and you're safe." Angela tried to move, but her body was still weak. The feeling of being in a safe place, away from the vastness of the desert, was like a balm to her exhausted soul. She looked at Karim, her mind still clouded, but she knew she was no longer alone. I thought I was going to die," Angela said hoarsely, her words coming out with difficulty. "Where am I?" Karim gave her a small smile, but it was an understanding smile, as if he knew exactly what she felt. "You're in the oasis," he replied with a touch of calm. "Here, the desert is not so unforgiving anymore. This is my home." Angela tried to process the words, trying to understand what was happening. She remembered the despair, the pain, and the heat, but it all seemed so far away now. The oasis. The name seemed like a promise of something new, of something that would welcome her. Karim stood up softly, and Angela watched him, still without the strength to move. He went to a wooden table, where he was preparing something, perhaps a drink or some medicine. When he returned, he brought a small cup of hot tea. "You need to rehydrate," he said, holding the cup out to Angela. "The desert takes a lot out of us, but here you can recover." Angela accepted the tea with trembling hands, feeling the warmth of the drink run down her throat. There was something healing in Karim's kindness, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The world seemed more welcoming here, more human, and it made her feel a peace she hadn't known still existed in her heart. "Thank you," Angela said, her voice still low, but with a touch of gratitude. She looked at the man who had rescued her, and for the first time since she had gotten lost in the desert, she felt as if there was a chance to start over. "You don't need to thank me," Karim replied with a soft smile. "The desert teaches us that we all need each other. Sometimes it pushes us to the limit so that we can find what really matters." Angela looked at him, absorbing his words, and for the first time in a long time, she felt that there was something more waiting for her, something beyond despair and loneliness. Maybe it was a new beginning. Karim and Angela were sitting near the tent, on a simple wooden bench, with the stars beginning to appear in the sky. The silence that enveloped them was comfortable, but Angela's inner tension seemed to grow with each passing minute. She gazed at the stars with lost eyes, as if they could answer the questions that haunted her mind. Her body was now more rested, but the emotional pain was still there, embedded in her chest, like a wound that would not heal. The thought of Brandon still haunted her, and although the tranquility of the oasis enveloped her, there was something unsettling in her heart. Karim, sitting next to her, noticed the weight in her eyes. He watched her with silent understanding, and his presence seemed to be the only thing that still anchored her in this moment of uncertainty. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said, his voice soft but full of empathy. "But I know something is bothering you." Angela looked at him, her face expressing the internal struggle she was feeling. She sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the silence lift a little as she began to speak. "My marriage. It's not what I imagined," she began, her words coming out thickly. "I thought that when I married Brandon, I would have everything. He was everything I ever wanted. But now, I feel like I'm just an ornament in his life, something he uses to show off, but not to truly connect with. He's so focused on work, on his responsibilities, that he's forgotten about us, about me." She looked down at her hands, which were shaking slightly. The words were difficult, but it was as if, for the first time, she was allowing herself to admit them. The pain, frustration, and tiredness of being ignored were finally being released. Karim was silent for a moment, absorbing each word, before answering with an almost mystical calm. "The desert has a way of showing you the truth. It takes you to the limit, makes you face what you try to avoid. The sand that moves with the winds that never stop. All of this teaches us that deep down, we are small in the face of the immensity of life." Angela looked at him, confused. "What do you mean by that? I'm not here to learn about the desert. I'm just trying to understand where I went wrong, how I got to this point." Karim smiled softly, as if the answer was already there, waiting to be understood. "The desert is not just a physical place. It is also a metaphor. It shows what is hidden, what you try to bury inside yourself. Maybe you have lost yourself trying to be something for someone else, forgetting who you really are. The desert brings these truths to the surface, even if you don't want to see them." Angela was silent, processing Karim's words. He was right, in a way. She had lost herself in a life that was not truly hers, sacrificing her own needs and desires for what she believed was expected. The pursuit of a perfect life with Brandon had blinded her to what really mattered. "What should I do now?" Angela asked, her voice breaking a little. "I feel like I've been destroyed inside." Karim looked at her with deep understanding. "You are no longer the same person who arrived here. The desert, the solitude, the silence. All of this can be hard to bear. But it is also in these moments that we find the truth about ourselves. Maybe it is time to ask yourself who you want to be, not for him, but for yourself." Angela felt Karim's words resonate deeply in her heart. The desert had not destroyed her, but had revealed her. It had stripped her of everything that was superficial and forced her to look inside herself. What did she want? What did she really desire besides being recognized, loved, respected? The answers were there, inside her, but they were difficult to accept. "I don't know who I am without him," Angela admitted, her voice trembling. "But maybe it is time to find out." Karim looked at her with a sincere gaze. "The desert is a place of rebirth, not death. You can choose who you want to be. It is not too late." Angela closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the desert wind touch her skin. Something inside her was beginning to change. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt brave enough to face this new path. The desert had not only lost her, it had also found her. And now, she was ready to find herself again. The silence of the night seemed to envelop the oasis like a warm embrace. The sky was clear, and the stars, shining brightly, seemed so close that Angela could almost touch them. The soft desert breeze caressed her skin, and she closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the immensity around her. The sound of the wind, the rustling of the palm fronds, and the deep silence were the only sounds she could hear. Karim stood beside her, watching her with a patience she was still learning to appreciate. He had become a constant and comforting presence in her life, someone who seemed to understand Angela's pain in a way she herself could not yet. He knew she was on the verge of a great discovery, but the decision, the change, had to come from within. "Look at the sky," he said softly, gesturing toward the stars. "The desert teaches us to be small in the face of this immensity, but it also shows us how vast we can be. Look at the stars and see how they shine, each one unique, but all of them together forming something greater. They don't ask themselves what they are, or if they are doing what they should be doing. They simply exist." Angela followed Karim's movement, her eyes fixed on the stars. It was hard not to get lost in that vision. The vastness of the sky, the cold and distant brightness of the stars. Everything seemed so simple, so natural. And she, there, in the middle of that desert, surrounded by so much silence, was beginning to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. Karim turned to her, his gaze firm and sincere. "Who are you, Angela? If you're not just Brandon's wife, who are you without this identity you've built around yourself?" The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. Angela looked at him, her heart beating faster, but in a different way. It was no longer fear or frustration, but a feeling of deep doubt. How could he answer that? How could he tell her who she was without the role she had spent so many years playing? Without the idea of being the wife, without the recognition that came with it? "I don't know," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I lost myself, Karim. I think I became just an extension of him, of our life together. I don't know who I am without that label anymore." Karim watched her carefully, in no rush to give an answer. He understood the pain of losing one's identity, the feeling of having been lost amidst preordained expectations and roles. But he knew that Angela's true journey was just beginning. He didn't want her to lose herself anymore. He wanted her to find herself. "You are more than that," he said quietly, almost as a statement. "You are a whole woman with desires, dreams, and strengths that you have not yet fully realized. Do not let what you were define who you can be." The desert has a way of teaching us this, of showing us who we truly are when there are no more distractions around. It is up to you to decide. Those words fell like raindrops on the dry soil of her heart, a barren terrain that had not been tended for so long. It was difficult, almost impossible to believe that she could be anything more than Brandon's wife. But the truth, the answer, was there, waiting to be discovered, like a rare flower blooming in the desert. Karim stood up slowly, holding out his hand to her with a soft smile. "Let's see the stars up close. Sometimes we need to look at the sky from another perspective, to see what was in front of us all along." Angela hesitated for a moment, but accepted Karim's hand, standing up with his help. They walked in silence toward a nearby hill, where the sky seemed even wider and the stars even brighter. When they reached the top, Angela looked up at the sky in all its magnitude. It was as if she were finally seeing something that had always been there, but she had never really noticed. The stars were scattered, not in an orderly fashion, but freely, shining with a single purpose. "Look," Karim said, his voice calm, "each star has its own brightness. They don't compete with each other. They just exist and shine." Angela took a deep breath, feeling a wave of emotions stir within her. She didn't need to be defined by Brandon or anyone else. She had her own light, her own brilliance, something she could no longer hide. "I understand now," Angela said, her voice firmer, as if a new strength had begun to grow within her. "I can be more than what he expects of me. I can be who I am." Karim smiled, satisfied with her answer. He knew that this was the first step towards Angela's true liberation. He didn't want her to get lost any longer on the path of being the wife. He wanted her to find the freedom to simply be Angela. The desert wind began to blow stronger, bringing with it a sense of renewal. Angela closed her eyes and, for the first time in a long time, smiled for real. She knew that there was still much to discover about herself, but for the first time, she was ready for this journey. The stars, silent and distant, continued to shine in the endless sky, as if bearing witness to a new phase in Angela's life. And in that moment, she felt that just like them, she too could shine on her own. The sky was deep and starry, and the night, like the desert, seemed a reflection of the vastness that Angela felt within herself. They sat on the soft sand, Karim beside her, his eyes focused on the stars, but also on the woman beside him, unraveling in layers of pain and discovery. Karim looked at her for a moment before deciding to speak, as if he were considering whether this was the right time to share his own stories. He, like the desert, had his own scars, his own losses. He knew what it was like to seek refuge when the world around him seemed overwhelming. "This desert," he said softly, "is my refuge. Not because it is empty or barren, but because here I cannot hide from myself. When I first came here, I was lost. The desert showed me that there is no escape from who we are. It forces us to look within." Angela listened intently, feeling a connection with Karim's words. She had never thought of the desert in this way, but perhaps now she was seeing it in a different light. The desert, with all its harshness and beauty, was teaching her the same lesson. "I grew up in a small town," Karim continued, looking out into the distance. "My father wanted me to be something I couldn't be. I was just an ordinary man in his eyes. When he died, I didn't know who I was. I came to the desert as a last act of escape, trying to find something that would tell me who I was really supposed to be." Angela didn't know what to say. Karim's story had touched her deeply, perhaps because she saw a bit of herself in him. His relentless search for identity, for something real. Perhaps she too was running away, not from the desert, but from herself. She looked at him, and for the first time since she had met the man, she felt a strange sense of comfort in his presence. Karim had found his refuge in the desert, where the answers were unclear, but where he could at least hear himself. She longed for something similar. I lost myself, Karim," Angela said in a broken voice, her eyes filled with a silent pain she no longer knew how to bear. "I lost myself in being just Brandon's wife. I spent so many years molding myself to fit his expectations, to be who he wanted me to be, that I forgot who I am. I forgot to live for myself." Karim didn't answer right away. He just looked at her with a soft expression, as if he understood more than words could express. He knew that Angela's journey was not an easy one, that she was confronting a difficult reality, the loss of her own identity. She continued, her eyes fixed on the sand, as if she were trying to discover something within herself. "I lived with him, by his side, always doing what was expected. I tried to be the perfect wife, but it wasn't me. I lost my voice. I lost my essence. And when I realized it, it was too late." There was a vulnerability in Angela that she had never shown to anyone, not even Brandon. But with Karim, she felt a kind of freedom, a sense of being heard without judgment. He didn't see her as just Brandon's wife, but as a woman with her own struggles, her own pain. Karim placed a gentle hand on Angela's shoulder, offering her the support he had given himself in the past. "The desert," he said, "doesn't tell us who we are. It forces us to discover it on our own. But what we can do is give ourselves the time we need to find ourselves without rushing." Angela felt Karim's words sink into her soul. She knew he wasn't just talking about the desert, but about her. She needed the time to discover her own truth, her own essence. Life with Brandon, with all its unfulfilled promises, had taken that time away from her. "I don't know how to begin, Karim," she confessed, her voice shaking. "I don't know who I am without him, without being his wife." "Start with yourself," he replied firmly, his tone now filled with quiet wisdom. And the rest will follow. The desert is not a place of suffering, but of rebirth. Perhaps here you can discover who you truly are, without outside pressures, just you. Angela stilled, allowing Karim's words to settle in her heart. There were no easy answers, but there was a truth that was beginning to germinate within her. She didn't need to be another role, another definition imposed by others. She could be herself. The silence between them grew comfortable, and for a moment, Angela felt at peace. The desert, with its vastness and mystery, no longer felt like a prison, but an open door to something new, to a new beginning. And as the stars shone in the sky, Angela made a silent promise to herself. She would find her own way, without Brandon's shadow, without the expectations of others. She would discover her true essence, no matter how long it took. The desert, with its silence and vastness, would be her guide. And she was finally beginning to understand that her true refuge was not somewhere far away, but within herself. The heat of the Riyadh sun had no idea of the turmoil that was forming in Brandon's heart. The city, which until then had seemed like a scene of luxury and pleasure, was now just a backdrop for the chaos he was beginning to face. Angela had disappeared, and with her disappearance, the pain he felt was so intense that it seemed to tear his soul apart. That was when he received the call from the hotel. The concierge's voice was terrified, as if the whole world was collapsing. "Mr. Brandon, your wife, Angela. She is not in the room, and there is no sign of her in the hotel. We do not know where she went." The sound of the words was like a bucket of cold water thrown in his face. What had he done? How had he let this happen? Guilt instantly enveloped him. He, who had spent the last few days so immersed in his commitments, now realized the extent of his neglect. What did he know about Angela, other than her silent presence at his side? "Where did she go?" he asked, his voice muffled with panic. "Was she okay?" The concierge answered hesitantly. "She went for a walk but didn't come back. And the camel guide reported that she got lost in the desert." The desert. That vast, unforgiving desert. The image of Angela lost there, amidst the immensity of sand and heat, overwhelmed Brandon. He didn't know what to do. The feeling of helplessness took over him in an overwhelming way. He could no longer ignore the obvious. Angela was suffering because of him, and he, preoccupied with business and numbers, failed to notice the growing pain in his wife. He had been selfish. Running through the hotel, Brandon could barely think. His heart beat faster with every step. "I need to find her," he repeated to himself, trying to hold on to some thread of hope. "I need to fix this." But deep down, he knew that words were not enough. He had distanced himself from Angela, no longer seeing her as a person, but as a part of his world of business, commitments, and expectations. Now Angela was lost, and he had no idea how to help her find herself, and he blamed himself for that. Meanwhile, in the desert, the tension took shape in a completely different way. Karim sat on his horse, scanning the horizon. The sky was clear, but the desert, as always, seemed to have an air of mystery. He felt that Angela's time here was coming to an end, not in the sense of death or imminent danger, but in the sense that something was changing in her. She was beginning to discover herself, to transform, and this change, as painful as it was necessary. Karim knew that Brandon's search was not for the same purpose. For him, Angela had already made the most important choice by walking away. She no longer wanted to be just his wife. She no longer wanted to live in the shadow of a man who saw her as nothing more than an accessory, an ornament that adorned his successful life. While Brandon was running desperately through the streets of Riyadh, Karim was in the desert, offering Angela something she had never had, the opportunity to be herself. The internal reflection Angela was doing was not only about what had happened to her marriage, but about who she would be without the expectations Brandon placed on her. And, by looking at the stars with Karim, Angela allowed herself to understand that her identity did not depend on being someone's wife, but on being true to herself. Karim, with his calm and experience in the desert, was not desperate. He did not see Angela as a lost being. For him, she was finding her way, her truth. He did not see her as someone who needed a savior, but as someone who simply needed space to breathe, to reconnect with life. Brandon, on the other hand, was lost, without direction. He ran from one place to another, trying to find Angela, but without understanding that his true search should be internal. He was no longer searching for his wife, but for the version of her he had always wanted, the version molded to fit into his organized and controlled life. But Angela no longer fit that mold. As he frantically searched for her, he felt an anguish he could not understand. The despair grew stronger with each passing second. But he did not know that in the desert, Angela was finding something he had never known how to give: herself. The contrast between the two men was clear. Karim was there to support Angela, not as a savior, but as someone who respected her time and journey. Brandon, on the other hand, was lost, not in the desert, but in the emptiness of his own life. He did not know how to hear or see Angela. He did not know how to connect with her, not when she needed it most. While the desert separated them physically, it united them in ways that Brandon did not yet understand. And perhaps that was exactly the point. In the desert, where nothing is what it seems, Angela was finally learning to understand herself. Brandon's phone rang, breaking the agonizing silence that had enveloped him as he searched the desert. His hand, sweaty and shaking, hesitated for a moment before answering. The guide's breathless voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Mr. Brandon, we found an oasis. Angela, she's been spotted there. We're on our way." The air that had once seemed oppressive now seemed lighter. The oasis, a refuge in the midst of so much aridity. Hope finally appeared on the horizon like a real mirage. With a sigh of relief mixed with fear and nervousness, Brandon pressed the accelerator of the car, his heart racing. The sound of the engine tore through the silence of the desert as he advanced towards the point indicated by the guide. "I'll find you, Angela," he whispered to himself, his voice choked, full of a pain he still didn't fully understand. "I'll fix everything." The tension in Brandon's chest was almost unbearable. The desert, which had once seemed vast and immense, was now a personal battlefield. Longing and regret mixed together, leaving him breathless. The closer he got to the oasis, the more he felt the pressure to meet Angela. He knew that something inside her had changed, but he didn't know what. With every kilometer traveled, he wondered, will she forgive me? Does she still love me? The sun was beginning to set, dyeing the sky an intense orange, while the shadows of the desert lengthened, creating an even more dramatic atmosphere. Brandon continued with the determination of someone who could not lose anything else. Life without Angela, he now knew, was an empty life, without color, without flavor. When he finally arrived at the oasis, the fresh air seemed to give him a sense of relief. But something else was also in the air, something he could not immediately identify. The sound of the water running gently, the tranquility of the place, everything seemed a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil he carried. He quickly parked the car and ran to find the guide, who was already waiting for him. "You need to go this way," the man said, pointing to a small path surrounded by palm trees which led to a tent. "She's there." The anxiety grew even more as Brandon approached the tent. He could smell the desert mixed with the freshness of the oasis. His heart raced, and his mind filled with images of all the moments he had let slip by, of all the opportunities he had missed to care for Angela, to listen to her. Now, In that moment, he didn't know what to expect. He only knew that he could no longer continue living in the emptiness of his own indifference. When he finally entered the tent, he saw her. Angela was sitting on a small makeshift bed, looking up at the stars in the night sky. The glow in her eyes reflected not fear, but a new strength, a strength he didn't recognize, but which he now understood to be his liberation. She was different, calmer, but also more distant. She wasn't the submissive, ignored woman he knew. She wasn't just Brandon's wife anymore. She was Angela. Angela's eyes met Brandon's, and in the silence that followed, a million words hung in the air. But before he could say anything, she spoke, with a calmness that made him shiver. "You finally found me," Angela said, her voice soft, but filled with something he couldn't quite understand. "But what do you want now, Brandon?" Her words were like a blade, cutting through the tension between them. Angela wasn't just telling him that she had found him. She was asking him what he really wanted from her. And the question was a reflection of what he wanted from himself. I don't know," Brandon replied, the words coming out of his mouth without the certainty he usually had. He looked at her, trying to understand how it had all come to this. "I'm sorry, Angela, I was wrong. I always put you on the back burner. I never saw you. I only saw what I wanted to see." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with unspoken meaning. Angela didn't rush to answer. Instead, she stood up slowly, her eyes still fixed on his. "You sought me out, Brandon. But do you know who I am now? Or do you still see me as the wife you've neglected for so long?" The question burned inside her, and the answer was no longer in her hands. What Angela needed was not a man who came after her to save her, but someone who was finally able to see her for who she really was. Not a wife, not an accessory, but a woman who had her own identity, her own dreams. Their reunion was tense, but not because there was anger or resentment. It was tense because they were both in moments of transformation. Brandon had come here with a desire to correct the mistakes of the past, but he knew that reparation would not come easily, would not come from empty words. The path to Angela would not be simple, and he would understand that only by looking at her with new clarity. And in that oasis, with the stars watching from above, the climax of the tension had finally arrived. Their reunion was just the beginning of a new journey, a journey that neither Brandon nor Angela knew for sure where it would take them. The night was silent, but the desert wind seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The stars in the sky above them were so bright they seemed to have a life of their own, following the slow, delicate unfolding of what was happening between Angela and Karim. Karim stood beside Angela, looking up at the sky. His presence was strong, serene, like the very earth they walked on. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a deep understanding, as if he already knew exactly what she needed to hear, what she needed to feel at this crucial moment. "Angela," he began, his voice soft but firm, "you can be whoever you want to be, without having to hide, without hiding behind masks. The desert teaches us that. It is vast and endless, but it teaches us that freedom lies in being ourselves, without fear, without demands. You can be the woman you want to be, without limitations." Angela looked at him, his words piercing her heart with a clarity she had not felt before. The truth seemed to reveal itself in each syllable, as if everything she had feared was finally being dispelled. I don't know how to be like this," she said, almost whispering, as if she were still trying to understand the implications of that freedom. "I've lived for so long for others, so long forgetting who I am." Karim stepped forward, his hands gently meeting hers. "You don't need to know now," he said, with a gentleness that made Angela feel at ease. "The important thing is that you allow yourself to discover, What you have to be is inside you. There is no more room for masks or living in someone's shadow. The desert showed you who you really are. Now, you can choose your path. Karim's words fell over Angela like a refreshing wave, washing away the doubts and insecurities she carried. She felt a strength within herself, a flame that had been stifled until then. What she was searching for was not just love, but the freedom to be who she really was. Love could come later, but the true discovery would be her own identity. Angela's breathing deepened, as if she were finally breathing for the first time in a long time. The weight she had been carrying, the responsibilities, the fear of disappointing, all of it began to melt away. In that moment, she understood that the decision was hers. The choice was hers. She no longer had to live to please anyone. She could be whoever she wanted to be. Little by little, the distance between her and Karim diminished, until their hands found each other more firmly, and their gazes locked in a silent moment, but so full of emotion that it seemed impossible to describe. "I never imagined I could find something like this," Angela said, her voice more confident now. "I never imagined I could be free." Karim, with a soft smile, leaned toward her slightly. "You've always been free, Angela. You just didn't know it." And in that instant, without another word, their lips met. The kiss was soft, but full of meaning. It was a kiss that sealed the beginning of something new, something that was not restricted by the expectations of a marriage that had never fulfilled her, something that had no strings attached, no limits. It was a kiss that marked Angela's decision. She was ready to live her life without fear, without being tied to the past. The connection between them was instantaneous, a reflection of what she felt inside. It was not just desire, but something deeper, something that involved acceptance and understanding. Karim did not see her as a lost woman searching for answers. He saw her as a strong woman, capable of redefining her destiny. Angela pulled back a little, looking at Karim with an expression of resolute decision. "I will be who I am, without any more restrictions," she declared now with a certainty in her voice that had previously seemed distant. "I will live my life my way, free." Karim smiled, a smile of pride. "And you will be magnificent." In that oasis under the shining stars, Angela made the most important choice of her life, the choice to be free. The desert had not only rescued her physically, but also freed her from everything that had held her captive emotionally. And as the desert wind whispered around them, she knew that her journey was just beginning. The tranquility of the oasis was abruptly interrupted by a familiar but now painful sound for Angela, the sound of a distant engine. She looked toward the horizon, and her heart skipped a beat. Brandon's car was approaching, cutting through the vastness of the desert like a reminder of the past, of the weight of unmade choices, unspoken words, unfulfilled expectations. She felt the heat of the scorching sun on her skin, but what really burned was the conflict within her. What would she do now? How could she return to that place, to that life that always seemed so far away, so suffocating? Brandon was coming toward her, bringing with him the promise of a life that was no longer hers, a life she no longer knew she wanted. She rose from the sand and walked purposefully to where he had parked, her heart pounding but her thoughts steady. When Brandon got out of the car, his gaze was one of relief when he found her. He looked at her with a mixture of concern and guilt. "Angela," he said, his voice soft but with a hint of urgency. I didn't know what to think. I thought I had lost you forever." Angela looked at him, her eyes marked by the pain and discovery she had experienced. "You lost me, Brandon. Not physically, but in a much deeper way." Brandon frowned, confused. "What do you mean? I came here to bring you back, to make things right." Angela sighed deeply, her words coming out with a quiet but relentless force. I found myself in the desert, and I can't be who I was anymore. I can't go back to the life I lived before. I'm not the woman you knew, the wife you wanted. I can't continue to live according to a role, to expectations, to a life that doesn't belong to me. The words fell heavily between them, and for a moment, silence filled the space. Brandon looked lost, as if he didn't fully understand, as if he was struggling to make sense of what he'd just heard. You can't do this, he said, his voice low, almost desperate. I did everything for us, for you. I don't understand what happened. I love you, Angela. I need you. What we have can't end like this. Angela looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness, but also with a strength she'd never known she had. I loved you too, Brandon. But what we had, it's not enough. I can't live as a reflection of what you expect of me, or as a prop in your life. I've lost myself trying to be someone I'm not. The desert has shown me who I really am, and I can't go back. I can't be who you expect. I can't be who I was. She took a step back, feeling the weight of the decision she'd made, but also feeling a lightness she hadn't known in a long time. I need to be free. I need to follow my own path now. And that path isn't with you. Brandon was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on her, as if searching for some word that would make her change her mind, but he found none. The emptiness she had felt before was now filled with something that was hers alone, the certainty that she was making the right choice. So this is it, he asked, the pain evident in his voice. Are you going to leave me? I'm not leaving you, Brandon, she replied softly but firmly. I'm finding myself, and I can't live to please you anymore or anyone else. I have to live for myself. The silence that followed was heavy, dense. But this time, it was no longer the weight of doubt or frustration. It was the weight of a decision made. Angela knew she would not return to the life she had. She knew that her journey was now different. She took one last look at Brandon, feeling a deep sadness, but also a sense of liberation. He was no longer the man she wanted to be for, and she knew he would no longer be the person she had to lose herself to either. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said finally, but my path is different now. With those words, Angela turned and walked toward the freedom she had always known she deserved. The desert had found her, and now she knew she was finally home. Angela watched without emotion as Brandon's car disappeared into the vastness of the desert. The dust rising in the distance seemed to carry, along with it, everything she had been. And as the sound of the engine grew ever more distant, she felt a peace she had never imagined experiencing. A feeling of lightness came over her, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders, and a new horizon opened up before her. She didn't know for sure what the future would hold for her, but she knew that now, finally, control of her life was in her hands. The desert, with its immensity and its silence, had shown her a harsh truth: the need to be true to herself, to be free to write her own story. With a deep sigh, she turned and began walking back toward camp. Every step she took seemed to reaffirm the decision she had made. No longer the submissive woman in a suffocating marriage, no longer Brandon's wife. Now she was Angela, just Angela. When she reached the tent where Karim was waiting for her, he looked up, as if he knew exactly what she was going to say. There was something in his eyes, a gleam of quiet understanding, a connection that transcended words. Angela stood before him, and for the first time, there was no fear or uncertainty. It was just her, with her truth, with her heart. Karim, she said, her voice firm but soft, I have decided to stay. The desert has shown me who I am and what I need. I can't go back to the life I had. I can't be the woman the world wants me to be. I need to be myself. And so I've decided to stay here. Karim looked at her, his smile serene, as if he already knew that this decision was inevitable. He took a step forward, and with his voice full of affection and respect replied, "Angela, the desert never lies. It shows us what really matters, and you have already found your truth. No matter what the world says, you are free now, and I am happy for you." She felt his words echo in her heart. He understood her, perhaps even better than she understood herself. The decision to stay was not just about being with Karim. It was about being true to herself, about choosing freedom, about embracing life with all its uncertainties and possibilities. On impulse, she approached Karim and for the first time kissed him with a silent but intense passion. The kiss was not just a gesture of love. It was a confirmation of her new life, of her choice to be authentic, unafraid to follow what her heart told her. "I never imagined that life would give me a chance like this," she said, her eyes shining. "But now I know that this is my place, with you and with my own freedom." Karim hugged her with genuine affection, and she felt, more than ever, that she was finally on the right path. The desert was not just a physical place. It had become a metaphor for her inner journey, for the search for truth and authenticity. "Welcome to your new life," he said with a calm smile. "And it starts now." Angela smiled at him, feeling a deep gratitude for everything she had experienced so far. She knew that the path would be full of challenges, but she was also aware that she was no longer alone. She had herself, and she had Karim, with whom she could share her new journey. The future was still a mystery, but for the first time in a long time, Angela felt ready to face it. "Yes," she answered, with renewed confidence. "Now anything is possible." And with that, the desert that had once seemed so vast and impassable now transformed into a space of infinite possibilities, where Angela could finally be who she truly was. She no longer had to be someone others expected, for in that arid and silent land, she had found herself. She felt alive. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of her true freedom. Angela looked out over the horizon, where the sun was setting, tinting the sky orange and pink. The heat of the desert seemed to soften as night fell, but inside her, the heat was different. It was a feeling of complete fulfillment, of peace and belonging. The gentle wind caressed her face, and she felt with all certainty that this was where she belonged. "I have finally found my truth," she whispered to herself. It was no longer about being someone's wife, no longer about living up to other people's expectations. Now, it was about being Angela, being true to who she truly was and what her heart desired. She turned to Karim, who stood beside her, watching the same sunset. There was a calmness about him, a security that she had never imagined finding, but that now filled her in a way that nothing else could. He had always known, somehow, that she would need to find herself alone before she could give herself over to a new love, to a new life. And when she finally made the decision to choose herself, Karim was there, ready to walk beside her. "Karim," she said, her voice firm but full of emotion. "I don't want to be anyone's shadow anymore. I want to be myself, whole, without ties. And here, with you, I have found the freedom to be who I am. I choose to live my life by your side." Karim smiled, the smile of someone who deeply understood the weight of her words. He knew that the love he offered Angela was not a possessive love, but a love that respected her, that saw her as a whole being, with all her weaknesses and strengths. He loved her for who she was, not for who he wanted her to be. "You were never a shadow, Angela. You were always a light. You just needed to see yourself that way, and now I see how much you shined," he said, with the softness he always used when speaking to her. "I also choose to stay here with you." Angela smiled, and it was as if all the pieces of her life finally fell into place. The desert, with its aridity and immensity, became the home she never knew she needed. The oasis, where she and Karim had begun to write a new story, now became the symbol of everything she desired and deserved: peace, love, and freedom. The days passed, and with them, life blossomed. Angela and Karim raised a family, with children who played under the clear desert sky, learning the beauty of simplicity and connection. Each day was a new discovery, a new experience, and Angela, now a mother, felt stronger than she had ever imagined possible. She looked at her children with eyes full of love and gratitude, knowing that they would grow up with the same freedom that she had finally found, no longer in the shadow of a man, but as a woman who chose to own her own story. And there, under the starry desert sky, with Karim by her side, Angela knew that, more than anything, she had found herself. The desert was not just a physical place, it was the reflection of her inner journey. It was the perfect metaphor for rebirth, for transformation. "I love you," Karim said one night as they stood together, stargazing. "I love you too," Angela replied, her eyes full of gratitude. "And most importantly, I now love myself." And so, Angela, Karim, and their children lived in the oasis, far from the shadows of the past, creating a home where love, respect, and freedom flourished. Life finally became what it should have always been: full, authentic, and full of possibilities. Did you like the story? If so, leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell. Stay tuned, because right now, a playlist with several incredible stories like this one will appear for you to binge watch.